Hello, everybody. This is Dan Whitman, and on your screen you have Robert Frye. I'm going to talk to him in a moment. Just going to mark this as November 17th, 2025, and it's our course on international crisis management. Um, with Robert Frye, I don't know where to start. He's an accomplished news producer, ABC News, in a time when in America network news was what we had, and in a way, Bob, I think it united Americans. It certainly did. The day of Kennedy's assassination, the whole nation was together looking at the same images. Now that we have cable news, I think that kind of cohesion is lost. You may have some comments about that. I just had an idea. What if we were to talk about um, network news, which you were the producer of the Peter Jennings Evening News, which was a major source of news to Americans in I would say, the golden age of television and real news. Um, if you could tell us a little bit about what has changed from that period, and then as we move into your remarkable documentaries, I think I'll show a few clips, and then we will discuss those. I have mentioned to this group that Bob is very much interactive. He likes to have your thoughts and he likes to make this into a discussion. So please, I want you to feel encouraged to unmic at any time, unmute whenever you'd like, and to become part of the conversation. Bob Fry, what are your recollections of network news as opposed to cable news? And what did it have that we have lost now?
Uh, First of all, Dan, I appreciate you inviting me. But I will say, as I'm looking at the screen with all your names in most cases and some images in others,
Yeah,
uh, I compliment you all on joining this, given what's going on in your country now and
thank
the
you.
challenges that you face as people and as a nation. Um, it is very important for us to completely understand the challenges you are facing. And I want to compliment Professor Whitman on his continuing work with you all on everything that he addresses. Um, Dan
Thank you,
is
Bob.
a dedicated professor and one who is willing to go the extra step in telling stories and inviting people like myself. But I must say, I am in awe of what all of you are facing in your country now. And the fact that you're able to join this session today, it is important, I think, for us, the United States, to understand the challenges that you face as a nation and as a people. And whatever you can take away from these sessions offered by Professor Whitman, I applaud him for providing you with the opportunity.
Um,
Uh,
Thanks, Bob. This
and
is, yeah.
I feel that what I would rather do is ask you all if you have any questions about what the value of news is in the United States. And I've been in the business now 62 years, and it is obviously a challenging time in the United States on many fronts. But I think it's important for me to hear what you have to say and what your questions are, rather than my going into some drawn out lecture on the old days as opposed to now.
Um,
So please, anyone that wants to ask a questions, click
yeah.
on and ask it.
Um, Thank you, Bob. You're very kind in your comments. You have great wisdom, and we're going to get it out of you today. But it's up to us to do so. I suggest we think of doing this in two parts. First, network news and the sources of news that we're all now getting, which they're confusing, they're multiple. We get stuff on social media, we get things that purport to be objective news. We're all immersed in this dialogue about what is truth and does truth exist anymore and post-truth. I suggest that we consider that question first, and then as sort of part two of this session, we'll look at some clips of one of your wonderful documentaries. The group saw the trailer Thursday to In My Lifetime, a remarkable piece of work. Let's consider everybody part one, part two. Part one, the news. And again, I'm thank you to those of you who have said to me, yes, you'd like to continue in January and February on this topic. Strategic communications, public diplomacy, propaganda, uh, disinformation, and news, which is part of what we're talking about. So let's get some introductory thoughts to things that we'll be considering more in detail in January, February. The news. Should I start? I feel, Bob, that we have lost enormously cohesion as a nation. Not that network news was part of the Constitution in the 18th century. It wasn't built in, but it grew from the 1950s for a 30-year period to be a kind of a unifying element in America. We looked to the news, certainly to your news production with Peter Jennings, who I think was he Canadian, Bob?
Yes.
Yes, and he was he I remember him as a neutral voice, a person bringing to his audience. There were three networks. This was ABC, and all three were really trying to bring facts, really with a minimum of interpretation. The day that Edward R. Murrow differed with his own network in deciding to call out um, the House on Un-American Activities Committee when he decided to actually express an opinion. That was a major shift, wasn't it, Bob, in the way networks deal with current events. They tended until that moment to simply bring to the people, here's what happened today. I feel this is a great loss because now, and this is a platitude, everybody knows this, but what we used to call news has become entertainment. Your reaction to that thought?
Let's put it this way, because of what Dan has mentioned already, the multitudes of resources available for individuals to watch or listen or read in the United States, it has become confusing, I think, for many. I have a phrase that I like using: you have to learn to become your own editor.
Right.
Now, for those of you on this Zoom call in Ukraine, I rather suspect everyone is tuned into the same um, channel, if you will, or sources of news. But I do believe it is very important for all individuals to understand what, in fact, is going on in the world. And and I feel that what you're experiencing in your country, I suspect there is there are sources that you listen to or watch and understand the reality. And also, as I have watched the continuing story coming out of Ukraine, you are being subjected to challenges that we cannot even begin to understand in the United States. And I think that also Ukraine as a subject and as a way of looking at the news is only part of what we are experiencing in the United States now. Um, and and I believe that for us to truly appreciate what you're experiencing, and again, as I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, I think what Professor Whitman is providing you is a much more defined way of looking at what's going on in the world. My documentaries on nuclear weapons, and as I said, I've been in the business for 62 years. I formerly was a network news producer, but I've done many different topics since the mid 80s, relating to different parts of the world. And so it really is something that is very complex from my vantage point. In terms of the number of channels and resources that are available, and as I've said a moment ago, you as individuals have to learn to become your own editor. Seek out information from sources that you trust or believe in, and see how the world relates. And I think the fact that there are so many of you on this Zoom call is another example of how information is gathered. Um, this kind of sharing of information and details just simply wasn't available even 10, 15 years ago. So the technologies have changed. But the most important thing, I think, is that beyond the technologies and whatever way you can look at the world, is not as important as taking the time to decipher what you're experiencing, which obviously, in the case of your situation in Ukraine, is much more complex than we truly understand in the United States, about the experiences of what you're going through. And I appreciate the fact that you may want to hear from me, but I'm also interested in hearing from you any questions that you might have that relates to my world. But again, the changes that have taken place in Ukraine, and I recall I was working with a Ukrainian on a project on the Orange Revolution, which obviously seems like a century ago, but
Yeah.
it's not really that long ago that you were experiencing that. Um, and here we are in 2025, coming up to 2026. And as an example, in my world of nuclear, in February of 2026, um, the treaty between the United States and Russia, the START treaty, is scheduled to be either renewed or not. And how it relates to Ukraine, of course, is that Dan has clips from the documentary that I produced on what happened with the Ukrainians at the time of the splitting of the Soviet Union. Um, but that's just as an aspect of the story.
Mhm. Yeah, let me just clarify. We have a majority of Ukrainians on this call. We also have participants from Kenya, from Haiti, from Nigeria, from Romania, from Croatia. So we are all Ukraine is the sort of the reason why this course exists. But we are all together looking at we all feel support for Ukraine. At the same time, Kenya has its issues. Nigeria has its issues. Haiti, of course, we have a Haitian on the call. So just so Bob understands that we do have a varied group. Now, he's just asked you, what is it, um, what is it that you can tell us about your own process of filtering information or with the sources that you use? There are marvelous. I discover new ones every day. There's one called Truth Hounds. Maybe the Ukrainians have heard of this website that I just discovered. Truth Hounds, and these are in this hounds like dogs, and this is a group of nonprofit activists who are looking for hard evidence in cases of abuse of human rights. There are there's also a meeting taking place in Washington this Wednesday, I think it is, where, as I think everybody knows, that the Georgetown Law School has an official agreement with the Ukrainian Ministry of Justice to figure out how to prosecute 170,000 cases of human rights abuses committed since February of 22. Um, any comment is welcome. Um, and
If I may inject for a
yeah,
moment, the multitudes of information and resources from around the world, and the fact that there are so many of you from other countries as well. It, to me, it used to be, even 20 years ago, there were very few resources. And the fact is, those resources were going out, not
Mm.
being gathered from wherever you are in the world. That's what's changed so dramatically. So, all of you, in your own way, are reporting your story or trying to understand your story, which was not the case. I mean, another example, the Voice of America,
Yeah,
which is no longer,
yeah,
for reasons that are not totally understandable. So
right.
there are sources that have changed dramatically in the course of even the last year. And I think that it is interesting to me. Again, I'm offering a request, to hear from your voices as to what's going on.
Yes. While you're thinking, folks, another thing comes to mind: the loss of bureaus. ABC I mean, does have a bureau in London, I guess, and I think the bureau in Rome, which used to cover the Mediterranean and Africa, is no longer. The loss of funding and the loss of bureaus. The bureaus in the 70s and 80s, if something happened in Senegal, you would have a reporter in Senegal reporting the news. Maybe, or you would have somebody who would be flying in from the ABC Rome bureau, or I'm not. Maybe you had them in Johannesburg and in Nairobi. These are gone. This is a huge loss, Bob. Is it simply
Well, I
the
think may I reveal, although I'm sure you've shared this information with this extended group, that your relationship in the United States government at the time, you were a very important middleman, if you will, between reporters and the world in the work that you did. And so you grew to know a lot of these people and to understand the underlying dynamic of how that information was being resourced
um,
and presented, because you helped facilitate, in many cases, when someone came into an area where you were based with the US government, you helped facilitate contacts for the reporters and the
yeah.
producers coming into this, what part of the world.
Um,
Have you shared that
well,
background with this group?
I haven't actually. As a press, I'm laughing because everything that I did is now gone. It's destroyed.
No, but I mean, the
We
point I'm making,
Yeah.
Dan, is that you were likely to encounter members of this group
Yes.
through your work, and
Um,
you got to know what was going on
well,
in
that's
the
an
number
important.
the parts of the world that
Uh,
represent these
Again,
people.
you're very kind. In previous times, before the internet was accessible to everybody, we had a thing called the Washington File. You may remember that, Bob, which was a compendium of statements and facts that would come overnight through by telegram from Washington to the various posts overseas, and which would provide quotes. I mean, this wasn't interpretation, it wasn't propaganda, it was just uh, yesterday, President Bush Sr. said something about tariffs, let's say, or something like that. And this was a source we never propagandized, but we would just the journalists in other countries would say, we don't care about your opinion. Just tell us what did they say, and we were able to provide that. That is long gone, and maybe no longer quite as needed when people have so many other sources. In some cases,
And
it was the only source they had. Um,
Dan, I heard a voice come on
I
just a
know, I
minute
did
ago.
too. And if someone wants to unmic, please do so. Harriet Ongaki asks or mentions, reminds us, it is said that anyone with a camera and a mic is now a journalist. What about citizen journalism, Bob? It's quite varied, isn't it? Because we have
Well,
good ones
sure it
and
isn't. It
yeah,
depends on whether or not they're interested in telling a story or whether they're interested in just telling a point of view. And that's what makes it so difficult for journalists today,
Uh, yes,
whether or not to sort out what is a story or what is a point of view.
yes. Let me give an assignment, an immediate assignment. Um, Anybody who's able, could you just put in the chat, what are your sources? Do you look to, are there certain nonprofit organizations that cover topics like human rights abuses? Um, Democracy Now. Uh, Olga from Haiti, are you familiar with Democracy Now, Bob?
I am familiar with the program you're talking about.
Um, yes, okay,
Yeah.
and Reuters, okay, somebody, uh, Baxter Katz looks at Reuters every day. Pretty good source, right? Um,
And, and, and I think in most instances, probably a well qualified source for finding out information because Reuters onto itself is a global network of reporters and writers from around the world. And they pride themselves on doing that, as does other wire services.
where would you put Associated Press in the
I
pyramid?
put it in. I put it in the mix as well.
In the mix. Aha. So you wouldn't put it as the maybe the primary thing. You are also a personal editor. You also take in um, different sources. Bob, what are the sources you look to?
Well, all of the above, um, and also, I mean, um, I read several publications. The Economist, the BBC, although the BBC is going through a very difficult time now
Oh, yes, very
for
difficult.
reasons that are complex.
Yeah,
Um, and I feel also, I mean, French news, they have an English service, and those that
yeah.
speak French,
France,
obviously,
France 24, right? Is
yes,
it?
and also Spanish. Um, and look, the fact is, you go anywhere in the world, you're going to find resources that are, and as you did in your professional career, you sought out people that were truth telling, if you will, that were able to present you with ideas and information that was, from your vantage point as a quote government employee, but one
Yes,
who took the time to understand the cultures that you were engaged in. And I think that's another point to make. We fully do not understand all the cultures, and that all of the cultures that are represented on the Zoom call, there are stories that are being told every day and sources. I mean, what's happening now in Africa? Um, Incredible number of stories. I mean, the Sudan story, what's
yep.
happening in Haiti. That is a story that obviously has its own complexities
Yeah.
as well.
You may have seen that yesterday, every American embassy has a small number of Marines just protecting the embassy building and the people who work in it. They're not there as a military force, they're just to protect the embassy. There was an exchange of fire 2 days ago in Haiti. Gangsters actually fired on the Marines. This never happens. And the Marines exchanged fire. Nobody was hurt. Bob, I don't know if you can see the chat, but they're quite. This group is very active. Amy Goodman, Juan Gonzalez, Democracy Now, Telegram channels in Ukraine, primarily run by civic journalists and activists rather than career journalists. That's really intriguing, I think. Jonathan David from Romania, primary sources, government, foreign affairs ministers. And I should stress that at least decades ago, my function, since you mentioned it, my function was not to really interpret things, but just to bring quotes and facts to the people in other countries who were the information providers. I never harangued them. I mean, there was the issue in the 1980s of the American intervention in Central America, I had very strong personal views about that. But when I was working for the embassy, that was not the point. They wanted to know, what did Washington say? And they wanted to make their own interpretation of that. BBC, CNN, Matthias, who's in Cameroon today, um, Radio France Internationale,
No, I mean, I've
Economist.
seen, actually, I've gone to the chat, and these are all reliable sources. I
Yep.
think the other thing that would be important, Dan, to bring up is that these sources are reliable because of what over time tests out to be accurate.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
it's not just a question of one time, but on an ongoing basis. And again, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, what all of you, I think the greatest challenge for your generation, and I'm assuming most people on this call are of younger generations, um, you know, you're,
Relatively.
you're learning how to not only acquire information, but also, as I said, to become your own editor. That,
Yeah.
what strikes you as being truthful? How can you find out what's going on in the world outside of not only your own country, but in other places around the world?
Hmm.
And I think that one thing that Dan has provided you with are some people that have their own experiences, obviously, but at the same time, he vets all of us who appear with you, that we over time become um, experienced in terms of storytelling from
Uh-huh.
my vantage point.
Uh, Now you see, we have Tengri News in Kazakhstan. We have people from
Yeah,
Kazakhstan on this call. Tatiana Mikolajczyk, why don't you unmute and ask your wonderful chat? We'd love to hear your voice. Can you unmute Tatiana? And I should point out, Bob, some people are on their cell phones and cannot unmute. So if Tatiana cannot, let's look at her comment, and then I would like to move to part two of this discussion, which is,
well,
um,
can
yeah,
I interrupt for a moment?
please
The
do.
fact that you're all the fact that you're all on this call says to me that you're interested in learning from other sources.
Yep.
And I feel that, how that becomes part of your life is important as well. So, thank you very much for joining and for making comments.
Yeah. The gist of Tatiana's question is, can news items actually influence foreign policy? I guess that's a yes and no question, right? It sort of depends.
Well, tell me from your own experience, Dan, what it does.
Um, oh my, oh my. I'm laughing because I immediately think of the lies we heard during Vietnam, the body counts. Remember the body counts?
Oh,
And
yes,
and
the daily briefings.
even
But
even
again, that was a government source in most
um,
cases, and they were
well, yeah,
trying to.
but the point is, Walter Cronkite, when he reported from Vietnam, shattered all of that. And yes,
Exactly, but it took 3 or 4 years for that to happen until
right,
he decided to go there.
yes, and the process in that case, this was a one-time thing. I don't know if this is a universal principle, but a government was lying to its people. We know that. Um, and a journalist, at a time when journalists never did this, uh, had the audacity to go to the scene of where the war was actually taking place, to report, to show the video, and that did indeed change policy
Well,
at a time when governments, and I think also of the 1980s, when NATO, led by the United States, was going to install intermediate range missiles in UK and Germany, and what they never understood was 1 million people came into the streets to protest that, and during the period of Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, this was a huge misunderstanding on the part of governments that did not consider public reaction in making their decisions. It was I believe and that occasion when suddenly there was a huge change, at least in the U.S. government, which suddenly realized, oh my gosh, we have to consider public opinion before we make foreign policy choices.
Well, in my first film in my lifetime, you may recall the sequence showing the demonstrations that took place on the streets in the early 80s.
Um, yeah, Bob, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to mute everybody. I'm sorry. Just, um, yes. Now, I have muted everybody. Bob, can you come back? Can you unmute now? Um, Bob, I'm going to make you a co-host. Here we go. Yes, when somebody forgets to mute, it ruins the entire dialogue. So, Bob, you're now a
Okay, go ahead.
co-host. Okay.
Um, what I recall about the 80s, it was a time when the world really woke up to the reality of what was going on with nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And that's why the demonstrations. And I feel that, we're now in another era. And for all of you experiencing what is happening in the world, and as I said, as Dan already pointed out, many, if not all of you, in one way or another, are experiencing what this world is changing, how it's changing, and the conflicts that are taking place all over the world. And the challenge is, how can you? I mean, and we're addressing today from the point of view of storytelling. What story is there that is being told where you are coming from, as opposed to other stories from other parts of the world? And I feel that we're now in a very challenging time in the world, trying to sort out truth from maybe what is not so truthful.
Yes, we call them lies. You're very gentle. I would like to show a few clips from your third uh, documentary. Let's see. There's a process here, and oh, there we go. Share sound. Okay. Um, Here, everybody, is just a few clips. Well, a total of 5 or 6 minutes. Um, this is Bob's most recent documentary. This one, called In Search of Resolution, is the third of three. Let's look for just a moment, just to relive those magical moments. Um, I think it was 1988, was it, or 87 in Reykjavik. This was an amazing moment, which Bob has captured
If
in
you remember
one of
an
his
important Reykjavik and historical meeting between Gorbachev and Reagan, where we did come close to at least putting on the table discussion of getting rid of all nuclear weapons. That's what Gorbachev was proposing to Reagan.
But then again, they found other problems and other excuses and did not accomplish what they.
I mean, this is a wonderful footage. We've all seen this, Bob, but you have managed to take footage that is universally known and to remind us of that amazing moment. As we know, they were these were the heads of two superpowers who went in to negotiate something called intermediate range nuclear forces. To their own surprise, they almost were able to agree on the elimination of all nuclear weapons. And the whole thing broke down when Gorbachev said to Reagan, this thing about your strategic defense initiative, Star Wars, that's not going to work. And Reagan refused to discuss the potential for creating a strategic defense initiative, which is now brand new once again in the Trump administration. This Golden Dome idea of having a defense. This caused the entire discussion to break down. However, what did come out of this was the INF Treaty, which was a remarkable and wonderful thing. Let's jump to a scene that to me is very moving. We're going to see survivors of the Hiroshima attacks. You'll note, of course, they're older in age, And every year they come together to mark the moment, I think on the anniversary of that attack. And they're singing in their softest voices just a simple wish: let this not happen ever again. Let's look at that clip. Comes at 14:50. Here we go. There we go. This is a commemoration, everybody.
Silent prayer.
Anthem silent prayer
used.
Sorry, let me see.
Even with this, with the
16. Now, this scene, which is reenacted every year, Bob, if I'm not mistaken, you have a different capture of this ceremony in your first documentary, In My Lifetime, with a larger number of people. And I guess in 2022, the survivors, of course, every year there are fewer of them. And I think I remember the first clip in your first documentary to have maybe 100 people. And in the one we've just seen, there may be 40 or so. And we know why. I want to now show everybody a quote you have all heard, but maybe you've never seen the video version of this. J. Robert Oppenheimer in this very famous quote, but I want you to look at the intensity and the anguish in his face as he talks about the power unleashed by the nuclear
Shortly
weapons.
after the first bomb was successfully detonated,
we knew the world would not be the same. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Only a master of documentary could produce a clip that moving. You've all heard the quote. The quote is often misinterpreted to mean that J. Robert Oppenheimer had some pride or some encouragement, that he felt a sense of power. Quite to the contrary. He was in a state of anguish, wasn't he, Bob, in looking back at what had been done. we don't know if he had had the choice to do it again, might he have refused to do it? We don't know. And
Well,
finally,
that quote was actually filmed in 1962. So it
okay,
was, many years after.
yeah, no, I know he was looking back, and I mean, my feeling when I watch this clip is he was speaking from anguish, not
Yeah,
from pride.
yes.
Now, one last one, which is relevant to
May I say
Ukraine.
something before you go on?
Please do, and I'll look for the next clip while you do that. Yeah,
For
this.
everyone, we'll go ahead and show the clip and then I'll
No,
come.
no, go ahead, Bob. I'm just going to find the Blinken quote.
Everyone listening on and watching on this call, I could only think that for all of you in your own countries, in your own situations, have similar reactions to what is going on in your world today. That was representative of a time, the dropping of the first nuclear bomb, but it represents the continuing challenges that humankind faces today when it comes to conflicts. And whether it's a nuclear bomb or other sources, these conflicts continue to besiege the world that we live in. And you, in your own countries, are facing similar emotions and similar dynamics in how the world is responding to conflict. But that's for a longer conversation. But I just wanted to call that to
Yes, and the very current application of what you're saying, Bob, is what do we make of Putin's threats to use tactical nuclear weapons? Um, I would put that out as a question for everybody to consider. I'm going to show a clip now of Anthony Blinken referring to the Budapest Memorandum, which is very emotional thing. This is the treaty that was voluntarily signed by an independent Ukraine, and with the agreement, we will give up our nuclear weapons. We don't want them. In exchange, you will promise not to invade us. And as Ukrainians painfully know, every day they wake up and they remember Putin signed a treaty. Uh, was it Yeltsin, Bob, or Putin?
It wasn't Putin.
Yeah, it was Yeltsin, I guess.
Yeah.
Or, but the Soviet
Yep.
Union, sorry, the Russian Federation, because this was 1994, right? Uh, it became the Russian Federation 1991. The Russian
Yes.
Federation promised, you give up the nuclear weapons, we won't attack you.
Yes.
This is crazy. Now, here's a short clip. It's just it's 1 minute, and it's Tony
nuclear
Blinken
facilities by
recalling in
Russian
the
military
General
forces.
Assembly
We have
this
our
agreement.
own capabilities for this purpose.
Russia's aggression against Ukraine is a brazen violation of international law, including the United Nations Charter. And it's also contrary to the rules-based international order that we all seek to uphold. But critically, and it's directly relevant to what brings us together this month for the NPT Review Conference, its actions are also directly contrary to the assurances that it provided to Ukraine in 1994 in the so-called Budapest Memorandum, assurances of Ukraine's sovereignty and independence that were vital to giving Ukraine the confidence to give up the nuclear weapons it inherited when the Soviet Union dissolved and that were left on its territory. So, what message does this send to any country around the world that may think that it needs to have nuclear weapons to protect, to defend, to deter aggression against its sovereignty and independence? The worst possible message.
Okay, now this of course is painfully known by all Ukrainians, and we should all remember what is the worth of a treaty when one party has no intention of abiding by it? Why do we sign treaties, Bob?
Well, treaties are signed, I mean, again, with the hope that they will hold. And again, referring back, as I said, knowing that all of you on this call are not necessarily in Ukraine, but in other parts of the world, there is always the hope that conflict can be avoided. But unfortunately, we continue to be challenged in many ways around the world. And again, getting back to why I've been invited by Dan to be with you today is to remind you all, I'm not lecturing, but just suggesting it is important for you to understand the underlying dynamic in your part of the world as to what's going on in not only your country, but in terms of other conflicts as well. And Ukraine, obviously, is a prime example of the challenges being faced in your country for those of you who are in Ukraine. And what is impressive to me is that you have found a way to be on this call today. And both Dan and I have the luxury, if you will, to being at a place in our lives where we have experienced a lot of what we're trying to talk about. But I go back to the fact that it is important for you to understand the underlying dynamics in your country and what you can do to, if you will, tell the story and truth telling in a way that is going to help not only yourself, but others dealing with whatever the situation happens to be.
And is this a universal matter? Ursula, in Benin, a country that is hardly noticed by Western media, asks very relevantly, I don't know if you can even remember any story from Benin in West Africa, Bob, but if you could, what would have been the sources that ABC News might have looked to in order, let's say there was some event in this small country in West Africa um, that was profoundly affecting the people of that country, but went largely unnoticed in the Northern Hemisphere. What would ABC News have done to to uncover a story like that? Let's say a coup d'état or a natural disaster, for example.
In most cases, you would try to find what was called in the days, and I think there probably still exist, either you or someone in a government that provides information truthfully, or to find what they call a fixer, someone who is understanding of a story and has proven over time to be a truth teller. Because Benin, obviously, as a country, would not be called upon in the world stage, except for unfortunately something that was a disaster. But I think if someone had the capacity to find a stringer or a fixer that would be telling the truth to help sort out the details, that would be the way that a correspondent would be airdropped into a situation like that.
And the stringer would be a stringer for ABC or for Associated Press or for Reuters or any of those?
Any of the above.
Okay. And explain stringer in case people are not familiar with that. The term comes from, I think, 19th century journals where
someone who has proven over time to be a truth teller, and someone that through contacts would find someone who would be available to work with a reporter or producer from the western part of the world.
Yeah.
Because in most cases, they would not be there on a regular basis, full-time basis.
Right. And I would say anyone on this call could be a stringer, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yes. How does a person, let's say somebody on this call, establish contact and make it known that they're available to networks and media and wire services? How do they go about making themselves known?
Good question. And I think the answer would be provided by getting in touch with you and you would refer them to someone at this point in time?
I would be honored and delighted to do that, but I don't. I'm not sure who I would refer them to. But in principle, this is a magnificent concept. Tetiana Mikolajczyk's second chat reminds us. I think it was the Mark Twain quote: "The lie goes around the world while the truth is putting on its pants." Was that a Mark Twain quote? And Tetiana refers to this concept. The lie goes out so quickly, whereas the documentary film, like the three that you have made, she asks, how does this function? How do you hope that it functions in giving a deeper understanding? Lies seem to be immediately consumed by lots of people, whereas a documentary film, which is more thoughtful, which takes more time, people must devote some time to actually considering it. How do you see your work as counteracting against deceit?
Well, based upon reputation or distribution. I mean, these films, and I've done several over the course of time, have appeared on public broadcasting in the United States, as well as through a distributor in Europe. And in those cases, the vetting process that one goes through, I've gone through to tell the story, has to be reviewed and understood as being a truthful story. So it's not like I just put it out there online. But I think that to the point, people today can put anything they want online through many sources, and it's not always that they're vetted. And so I think that's the challenge. How do you find distribution sources that will be vetted so it's a not just a point of view, but a wider concept of telling a story?
Now, and could you add to that, Bob, your own story in bringing your documentaries to the attention? I know you've been traveling the world. You've been to Iceland and maybe Japan, in working with young people, showing them your work and involving them in conversation. This, of course, does not involve millions of people. It has smaller numbers, but tell us about the importance of establishing context and contact with younger people, even when it's not reaching millions of people at the
Well,
time.
again, Dan, I think what is important to me is the third film, which you showed clips of. And again, I would appreciate it if you have the opportunity to share the streaming of the three films with this group, if
I
they're
have
interested.
done that. Yeah,
Okay.
they have the links. Yeah.
And let them make up their own minds about what they're seeing, as opposed to believing.
Mhm.
Because again, the concept of truth telling from different frameworks is always a challenge. And I don't think that telling a story is not subject to challenges. I think it has to be told in a way that will be accepted as being a story that's trying to tell the truth. But again, because of the fact that we live in a world that is so diverse and that everyone has their opinions, it becomes a challenge for all people, producers like myself, to at least put something out there that will be understood as an attempt to tell the truth. And also because most of you are of younger generations, having not experienced a lot of what Dan and I have experienced, you're looking at it from a different point of view, generationally as well. And I think that's what one of the greatest challenges today for anyone telling a story. What generation are you speaking to,
Yes. Mhm.
as opposed to just our generation? And I feel that that's important because you all represent tomorrow as opposed to yesterday and today. And so I think it is important for you all, in your own way, to take the time to get deeper into a subject that is of interest to you, or you feel that you're watching something that may not exactly square with what you understand. And I return back to the one point I made at the beginning of this conversation. You have to become your own editor. I mean, take the conflicts that are taking place in the world today, Ukraine, what's going on in Gaza, whatever other points of contact, Haiti, anything in Africa, Southeast Asia. There's always a point of view, but it's not just a matter of trying to get the story out there. It's a matter of people receiving the information in a way that they feel is accurate. That is a great challenge, I think, because the world today is so filled with different points of view and different conflicts, and also, unfortunately, conflicts that are not being resolved. And what is the challenge for you being in the middle of all of that, I think is important to understand.
I think you've just laid down the gauntlet for what some of us will be doing in January and February. These are themes you've just actually introduced unwittingly, the themes that we're going to try to develop in January and February when we talk about strategic communications, public diplomacy, disinformation, FEME, and propaganda. That's the theme that we will try to develop early in the new year. I I'm sort of superimposing an impression I have, correctly or incorrectly. It seems to me that younger people put a great amount of value on numbers, that people who are subject, and I would say victims of social media, they're interested in how many hits they will get, how many responses. What Bob Frye is asking you to do today, ladies and gentlemen, is not to be a member of a group of 1 million or 10 million people. I think the word elite, which has a bad connotation, I think we should accept that those people who subject themselves to the self-analysis that Bob is suggesting, you are an elite. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with being a small number. Small numbers can move great things. As Kennedy said in the trailer of In My Lifetime, Archimedes said, "Put me in a place and I can move the world." The fulcrum idea, which everybody viewed last Thursday, the Kennedy quote, "Put me," he said to the UN General Assembly, quoting
When I first
Archimedes. Yeah,
when I
please.
first got involved in this business in 1962, way before you were born, probably even before your parents were born, I worked with a fellow by the name of Frank McGee, who was an anchor at NBC News. And one evening, as he was writing a radio newscast for NBC Radio, I said to him, "Frank, why are you doing this as opposed to having a writer down the hall do this?" He said, "Bob, because if I can tell one story accurately, that one listener understands a little bit more about what's going on in the world, I will have done my job for the day." I've always used that as sort of a guiding principle. It's not about masses, it's about individuals listening, watching, whatever, what's going on in their world, and sorting it out in a way that you feel is representative of what, God forbid, we call the truth. And your job really is to understand that story and then carry it forward. And the point that Dan made about multitudes, millions, I mean, I have fortunately, over the course of my career, been able to make films or documentaries or be engaged in situations. I mean, for example, I was in the control room at NBC working with a fellow by the name of Frank McGee, who I already mentioned, at the time of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Dare say that that moment in time shifted the whole role of instantaneous journalism as we have come to know it today because of that killing by Lee Harvey Oswald. And I remember being on the phone in New York, and there was a correspondent in Dallas. I was waiting to get word from him, and he came on the phone after a while and said he's dead. And he was saying, and we put it on the air right away. 3 days later, I was in the control room on a Sunday when there were 5 of us in the control room, and we were live images to Dallas. And one of the correspondents in Dallas said, "Here he comes." And we switched live to Dallas as Jack Ruby stepped out of a crowd and shot Lee Harvey Oswald. That was the first live assassination of anyone. And the world has changed so much since then. But I think the point is how this world that you live in is continuing to grow in instantaneous responses. And I mean, obviously, the situation in Ukraine today is an example of what's going on for those of you listening from Ukraine. And I think the challenge is that your curiosity and your desire to be able to understand what the story is and how it is important in your lives is very important for me to impart the message. You have to become your own editor, and you have to understand. You don't have to, but I would suggest you choose to take the time to sort it out because it's coming at you very fast and furious.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you.
This is a powerful call to action. I wrote it quickly. I don't know if I got it. This is for me, a very profound quote. Frank McGee, "If I can tell one story to one listener, I feel I have done the work of the day." Did I get that correct?
Yes.
I think that's a very powerful idea. And I think young people, through no fault of their own, they don't think this way. And I think Bob and I, as older people, are encouraging you to consider the vast importance of one story and one person. It's something that people don't seem to do much anymore. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying, please consider this as a very noble thing to do. And thinking back again to the Kennedy quote in the UN General Assembly, "Give me a point, tell me where I can stand to move the world." And he did. And he did. And so did Eisenhower, by the way.
And by the way,
Yeah. Yeah.
that talk by Kennedy, just 2 months later, he was dead.
Right. He did that in August of 63, and in November of 63, he was dead, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And I would just add, I think we said it earlier, at the moment of Kennedy's assassination, the audience was united in America. There were 3 networks. They all covered this story live in a way that brought the nation together. We have lost this. This is no longer possible.
And incidentally, the shot that Lee Harvey Oswald fired at Kennedy was not seen for days later because there was only film. And this fellow Zapruder filmed.
Zapruder, yes.
But that footage was not immediately available. So,
before we let you go, remind us about Zapruder and this remarkable footage that became universal. He was just a citizen with a movie camera watching the thing. Remind us this
camera, and it came back. It came out later. The footage came out later.
And this again became something universal. All Americans then saw that, quite grisly, quite gruesome. Nowadays, gruesome images are commonplace. We see them everywhere. It had a tremendous impact in a way
And
that
many of you on this call, unfortunately, experience similar incidents in your country now.
I know. And not only Ukraine.
That's what I
We've
said.
had
Yes.
courageous Kenyans in the streets demanding change and being willing to be killed, as a few hundred of them were.
Right.
And we admire everybody. I think for the purpose of keeping Bob's message very clear and very simple, we might end at this point. You become your own editor. And again, the Frank McGee quote, which I've highlighted here, I think it's marvelous. If I can tell one story to one person, then I have done my work for the day. Bob, you have done more than that, both in mass media and also in a more refined and considerate series of remarkable documentaries that are themselves not emotional, but when I watch them, I become emotional. And your work is marvelous. It's artistic and it's informational at the same time, which you alone have mastered. We thank you. We thank you, Bob. And
I
we
would
look
like
to
to say
you.
one thing. I alone, amidst a community of people who do the work. So Dan, I appreciate the fact that you've invited me. And for everyone on this call, I wish you the very best in your lives and in your situations, and with an understanding that the challenges you face moving to the future is not going to be easy, but I wish you all the very best. And thank you, Dan, for the opportunity to make an appearance with you today.
Thank you, Bob Frye, and we will stay in touch. I hope you can see the screen, which is
Yes.
filled with emojis of thank you and praise.
No, I appreciate the emojis.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob Frye. Thank you, everybody else. On Thursday, Bill Taylor, Ambassador to Ukraine 2006, 2009, and probably the most prominent person in the media in America in February and March of 2022. He will join us this Thursday. Thanks,
And
everybody.
may I say one more thing, that your professor, Mr. Whitman, is able to obtain great guests for you. Take advantage of it. These voices are very important for you to hear.
Thank you, Bob Frye. None greater than you.
No, not
Goodbye.
true.
Okay.
Anyway, I appreciate it.
We'll fight over that. Thank you. The hearts and the emojis. Oh my God, let's let them come. Oh, thank you, everybody.
Very
Thank
nice.
you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.